And we are live! Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Lunch and Learn! Oh, here with my live studio audience who are too busy eating away. And our virtual studio audience on Zoom as well. Wonderful to have you all here. That's it. That's it. It's cool. In so many ways, that's it. So, lunch and learn, boys and girls. We are going to talk, as we do, for a couple of minutes about the parasha.
Yep.
And then we will dive into Pirkei Avot. And for all those who are new to the series, ask any questions and make any comments at any point in the proceedings. Martin, you okay over there? Yeah. Okay, so Parshat Vayeshev, ladies and gentlemen. Parshat Vayeshev is the continuation of our drama with Jacob. He's now got 12 sons, and he just wants to kick back and relax, doesn't he? Because he's had it so hard over the last few decades with Esav and with Lavan and with the trickery and all of this that's going on. So the beginning of this week's parsha is Vayeshev Yaakov. That Yaakov just wants to settle down, and that's not a good thing, says Rashi. Rashi says that, if you're a tzaddik like Yaakov, this world is not for relaxation. This world is for growth and effort. And so no sooner does he want to sit back and put his slippers on and read the paper, he gets challenged with the story of his son Joseph and the turmoil that he will go through in the relationship with his brothers. So we read about how he has this favored son. Whether he's a favorite son or a favored son, I'll leave you guys to split the difference. But he clearly has a strong relationship with Rachel's eldest son Joseph, Rachel, who was the love of his life, and she died in last week's parasha. And they have this son Joseph, who at the age of 17 is growing up and noticing all of the things that his brothers are doing wrong. And as we know in this week's parasha, he has two dreams. One of the dreams where he was a sheaf of corn, and the brother. How's the song go? I had a dream and I can't remember the words now. From Joseph. No? Who's with me? Your 11 sheaves of corn all turned and bowed to mine. No? That's from the musical. I used to know all these words as a kid. I can't remember them now. Stick to the day job. Yeah, it's kind of the same thing, isn't it? So he has these dreams which seem to indicate that the brothers, the family, are going to be bowing down to Joseph. And clearly he is destined for greatness and destined for leadership. And the brothers are all destined to bow to him. And the brothers are not happy. They're not happy with these dreams. Although it's interesting because the Torah tells us that Jacob kind of must have been a bit interested in these dreams, because the Torah tells us that he was shomer et hadavar, that he kept these things in mind. He didn't know what it all meant. He knew that Joseph probably shouldn't go and make a whole big to-do about it. But nonetheless, the Torah tells us that Jacob was clearly cognizant of the divine messages that Joseph might have been receiving with these dreams. One of which, as we said, was the sheaves of corn bowing down to him. Well, we say sheaves of corn. I don't know if it says in the Torah sheaves of corn, but it says sheaves. And the second dream is about the sun and the moon and the stars, all bowing down to Joseph. So those will hopefully sound familiar to you. So anyway, one day, Joseph is looking for his brothers, and they see him coming from a distance, and they start discussing, what should we do with our brother over here? Should we kill him? Should we do this? Should we do that? And in the end, as the story goes, Reuven steps up and says, let's just not kill him, let's put him into a pit. And then they decide to sell him on and he ends up being sold into slavery and being taken down to Egypt. And I probably mentioned this here before, but it pays to mention it again. The Torah goes out of its way to tell us that Joseph, when he is taken by the Ishmaelites down to Egypt, it says that he was in a caravan, a merchant trading caravan, filled with different spices and balsam and lotus. And the Torah says, the commentaries, Rashi says, like, why does the Torah need to tell us what was being transported? And Rashi says, because normally Bnei Yishmael, the Ishmaelite traders, they didn't trade in these things. They normally traded in oil and kerosene and all of these foul-smelling oils. That was what they were usually known to be trading in. And so the Torah goes out of the way to tell us that they were actually trading in sweet-smelling merchandise, so that Joseph should have an easier time. Because being sold into slavery and having to deal with the stench of these fuels wouldn't have been such a nice thing. So Hashem did this miracle that the Ishmaelites on this occasion should be trading in sweeter. Oh, it's so much quieter now with the children. God, I can really tell the difference. Not that I don't love our gun children, but seriously, it's like anyway. So I don't even know if you could hear it there on Zoom. Are you hearing the tranquility by comparison? Anyway, break time's over, people. So the Torah goes out of its way to tell us that Hashem was trying to send him a little message here, that even when he was in his darkest moments, even when he was being sold into slavery and being abandoned and taken away from his family, that Hashem was clearly still looking out for him, because he was putting him in this sweeter smelling environment rather than this foul smelling environment, which the commentaries and our rabbis want us to take on board for our own lives as well. We all go through hard times, but there's always glimpses and little glimmers of goodness and brightness to help us appreciate that there's still hope and still light at the end of the tunnel. Yes, sir.
That was Rashi's commentary. Was there any other commentaries regarding that aspect?
I'm sure there are, but I don't have them in front of me. But help yourself to the shelf at the back and...
I'll help myself here.
So, onwards with our story. Joseph is taken down to Egypt, and he is sold to Potiphar. But before we get to the story of Potiphar, the Torah actually segues and goes into a completely different topic, talking about Judah, one of the other brothers, and his sons, and how they were supposed to have a relationship with a woman called Tamar. And on both of those occasions with both of those sons, it was unsuccessful. And it's a very interesting story. You can go through it, and it's when you look at it superficially, it's a little bit dodgy. Tamar basically manipulates the situation so that her own father-in-law ends up fathering a child for her. So that divides our parasha between the narrative of Joseph getting sold and then picking up the narrative later on with Joseph in prison in Egypt, or in Potiphar's house in Egypt. In between, we have this very interesting episode with Judah and his daughter-in-law Tamar. But very interestingly, of course, the union, the offspring, the descendants that end up coming out of this relationship between Judah and Tamar ultimately leads to the Davidic line, the Davidic lineage, which ultimately leads to Mashiach. So I'm sure when we get to this section in our bigger picture classes, we will no doubt reveal the depth behind having this episode dividing up the story. But this story paves the way for Mashiach. Just like, if you remember, we had a story about Lot and his two daughters. That story also paved the way for Mashiach. And this one does as well. Yeah, David.
About Yehuda.
Yeah.
In the end, he seems to be the most important of the brothers after everything happens. Did he in fact marry out?
What do you mean, did he in fact marry out?
Well, when he left the tribe, he took a wife from somewhere.
I don't know. What do you mean when he left the tribe?
The story of Yehuda and Tamar.
Mm-hmm.
Yehuda married, first of all.
Right.
Who did he marry? Did he marry someone who wasn't Jewish?
Don't know. I'm sure she would have joined him on his journey. You mean that he took a wife from an unsuspecting lineage?
Yeah. From someone we don't know. And there's great emphasis that the children of Israel should marry within.
Rashi tells us that this man. It says that this time Yehuda turned away from his brothers, and went to partner, as it were. Rashi says that they were partners with this Adulami, the Adulamite man, and that's where he meets Shua. As the I don't know. I haven't looked into that enough.
Is that the first time we're talking about the mixed marriage of the Torah?
I'm not certain that it would be.
No, the first time. Is that the first?
David's asking the question: did he marry out? But in all of these instances, they're taking wives from somewhere, and there will be a depth to the different places where they find their wives. But I haven't looked up enough on that to be able to give you a good answer.
Judah,
Yeah.
is it fair to say
No. Yes.
that Judah was sure that she was actually a prostitute? And where we look to the Torah for moral guidance and guidance generally in our lives, I really found it surprising. He knew she was a prostitute, so it was probably something that was done all the time. He was on the way to the temple. When he went back to find her, he went to the temple and asked them, where's the prostitute that usually is in front of the temple? Because he wanted to get his stick and his stuff back from her.
Well, what he got to that point because he got told that his daughter-in-law was pregnant with a child, and he was like, well, how's she done that? Because she's supposed to be marrying into my family with my third son. So that's when this whole story starts to unravel, and he discovers that actually the woman that he had consorted with, he'd actually ended up impregnating, and that was none other than his own daughter-in-law, Tamar.
The point he was making was it common practice
for people to go and
use prostitutes?
Again, can we wait till we get to the bigger picture on this one, please?
Yeah.
This is
It's the first time I heard the word prostitutes.
ever.
No, I mean, when you go into this,
Yeah.
it's quite shocking to hear about.
Well, I've told this story now for the last 2 years in Lunch and Learn, so either you keep missing this week every time, or...
No, you never used the word prostitute.
Did I not?
No.
Maybe I used the word harlot.
Woman of field
Anyway, so when we're able to go more into depth, I think we most definitely should do. But I'm going to keep this superficial because we've literally only got a little bit more than half an hour left. So just to kind of finish up the story for this week's parasha, after the episode with Tamar, we then go back to the story of Joseph, who is employed in the house of Potiphar. His wife, Potiphar's wife, as we know, was obsessed with Joseph and kept trying to seduce him. He kept refusing her advances until eventually it becomes a bit of a problem, and Potiphar's wife calls out and cries out that Joseph is trying to seduce her, and as a result of that, he gets thrown into prison. And the end of this week's parsha is Joseph being thrust into prison and hearing the dreams of the cupbearer and the baker. And when Joseph interprets the dreams, he says that the cupbearer is going to be restored to his position under Pharaoh, and the baker is going to ultimately be killed, and that's what happens. Yeah, no, that's the end of this parasha, and we know that Joseph asks the cupbearer, the butler, to kind of put in a good word for him to try and get him out, and we end up seeing, with hindsight, that this was the wrong thing for him to do, and it ends up meaning that he spends more time in prison than perhaps he otherwise would have done, because he didn't have that trust in Hashem that it would all work out. So those are the salient points of this week's parasha. We've got loads of questions. We're bursting at the seam with questions, but that's what our Jewish library is for. So, do help yourselves and feel free to read up more on all of your burning questions.
Is that really a library for us to use?
That is most certainly a library for us to use. It always looked.
And it's the biggest shame that a shul of this size
doesn't have more.
Doesn't have a proper library.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's books behind books that are amazing.
No longer is that the case.
We need a room.
A few weeks ago, myself and Neil and Daniel and Jonathan from upstairs went through those shelves, pulled everything out, and threw away the junk, put into Seamus all the books that are never going to get used, reorganized at least the top 3 shelves. We still need to work on the lower ones, but that is now a semi-functioning
Never thought looking
Jewish
at it.
library.
I thought they just.
No, it looked like a dumping ground, and that was the problem. Yeah, one day, Martin, one day.
And we spent a fortune on books every year. We had a.
Where is this?
And
Kingston.
my previous. And we had a library that.
Yeah, it needs work, most certainly. All right, welcome, Richard. Great to have you on board as well. Okay, let's do some Pirkei Avot, peeps.
Everything's on the net now.
I think it's 561, if I'm not mistaken. Do we have enough Siddurim to go around? Peter, do you want to slide one across for Morris?
Rabbi, did you say 561?
I think so. Does that make sense? It should be chapter 5, Mishnah 22.
561, yes?
Yeah, or 591. I wasn't paying enough attention. All right.
561. What number?
Number 22.
Yeah.
All the twos, 22. Oh, is it 2 little ducks? 2 little ducks. All right.
And pancakes.
What's that?
And pancakes.
And pancakes. Okay, so I'll put the English up on the screen. Welcome, Gary. Who is going to take us through chapter 5, Mishnah 22?
I can't see. Mishnah 22.
I'll read it if you want to read.
Thank you. Nice and loudly, and aim for that microphone in the middle there.
Okay. Whoever possesses these 3 traits is one of the disciples of our father Abraham. Whoever possesses the 3 opposite traits is one of the disciples of the wicked Balaam. A generous eye, a modest demeanour, and a humble soul are the traits of the disciples of our father Abraham. An evil eye, an arrogant demeanour, and an insatiable soul are attributes of the disciples of the wicked Balaam. What is the difference between our father Abraham's disciples and those of the wicked Balaam? Our father Abraham's disciples enjoy this world and inherit the world to come. As it is said, that I may cause those who love me to inherit substance, and so that I may fill their treasures. The wicked Balaam's disciples inherit Gehinnom and go down to the pit of destruction. As it is said, but you, God, will bring them down to the pit of destruction. Bloodthirsty and deceitful men shall not live out half their days, but I trust in you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Howard. All right, comments and questions.
It's a long one.
It is a long one, so take a moment to take your time, to digest it. That's exactly the word that I would want to use. While you're digesting your bagels, go ahead and digest that as well. In the meantime, I'm going to switch to there. All right. So it's a lot to take in. what are we saying over here? We're saying that whoever demonstrates particular traits, if they're good, you are going to be like our forefather Abraham. And if you demonstrate these particularly evil traits, then you are a disciple of Bilam or Balaam. So do we know who these two individuals are? So Abraham, we know, is our forefather Abraham, a very, very righteous guy. And it would seem that the Mishnah is juxtaposing that as a polar opposite to Abraham is this individual Bilam. If we don't recall exactly who Bilam was, or Balaam, or however you want to pronounce his name in English. So Bilam, later on in the Torah, in the book of Bamidbar, is this great non-Jewish prophet. He's a very spiritual guy, but he's very corrupt. And he is employed by King Balak to go and curse the Jewish people. And he can't do it. He is unsuccessful. He ends up giving us blessings, like the famous words, Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov mishkenotecha Yisrael, how goodly are your tents, O Jacob. So that is who Bilam was. And we are taught over here that they seem to be polar opposites. Abraham had three traits: a good eye, a humble spirit, and a meek soul. Or as it says on the screen, a good eye, a humble spirit, and a moderate appetite. So then you are like Abraham. And if you exhibit the opposite, the evil eye, the arrogant spirit, and a greedy soul, or as it says, an evil eye, a haughty spirit, and a limitless appetite, then you are a disciple of Bilam. So it's very interesting because we're not necessarily able to see the differences between Abraham and Bilam just by looking at them necessarily. But the point more is that the enormous difference becomes unmistakably apparent as time goes on, because we are the descendants, the disciples, as it were, of Abraham. And what's interesting is that we don't know who the descendants of Bilam are, but I think what the missionary is trying to tell us is that perhaps he literally brought these behaviors to the world. So if we are displaying these behaviors in 2021, it's because Bilam somehow introduced this combination of toxic traits into the world, perhaps. And so that's why maybe we're told that we are the disciples of Bilam. There will have been bad people beforehand, but it's interesting that the Mishnah says that you are a disciple of Bilam if you behave in these three ways. And that might be because he brought these three traits maybe all in one go. I'm not particularly sure. But it's just interesting nonetheless why it tells us that these are the two polar opposites. Because you could ask the question, maybe we should be a student of Moshe Rabbeinu. One thing we might not appreciate is that Bilam and Moshe were the greatest prophets who have ever lived. It's just that Moshe was Jewish and Bilam was not Jewish. So what's going on over there? So Rashi tells us at the beginning of the story of Balak and Bilam that Bilam was granted the same level of prophecy as Moses, as Moshe. Even though he was a non-Jew, even though he had not had the same level of accomplishment as Moshe, we're taught that he was gifted the same clarity, the same level of prophecy as Moshe Rabbeinu. And Rashi says it's because in case the other nations of the world wanted to protest and say, well, of course you've got the Jewish people looking like this. Of course you've got a Moshe Rabbeinu. He was the greatest prophet that ever lived. He spoke face to face with Hashem. He had this clarity of prophecy that's completely unmatched. So what do you expect? Of course you're going to get a leader like that. Of course you're going to get a Jewish people who are faithful to you and who follow you. And so Hashem purposely arranged it that Bilam would also have this opportunity, so that he could turn around and say, well, excuse me, I gave the same skill set to Bilam. One second. I gave the same skill set. Well, why would we think that he didn't?
Because he only communicated with God when he was sleeping.
How do you know that?
It says in the Torah.
Does it? Does it?
I think so.
You sure? Maybe I'm wrong.
He said, I'll go to sleep, and in the morning, I'll tell you what the results of what God said to me.
In that case, I'm mistaken. But with the exception, perhaps then, of that clarity of communication, he was gifted a level of prophecy which was extremely intense. If it's not exactly the same, it was still a level of intensity that he could have capitalized and become as great as Moshe. It says, spend the night here and I shall give you a response. What, you think that means he's going to sleep?
Yeah.
It doesn't say that he's going to sleep, just says that he'll tell them in the morning.
Sounds like it, doesn't it?
Just because it says it, just because it sounds like it, doesn't mean it is it.
Who was the one that had all the idols?
Rashi says it's because the Ruach HaKodesh only rested on him at night. That doesn't mean that he wasn't communicating.
Well, many people and religions have the gift of prophecy, but do they use it for good or evil?
Yeah. So that's really the point. So if he did find, could be that I'm mistaken on the method of communication, but the intensity and the level that he was on to be able to have that gift was put into place there to give him the opportunity to be as great as Moshe, and he didn't seize that opportunity, and perhaps that's because of these three traits. Yes, Morris.
Who was the one? Was it Bilam that had all the idols and the big idols smashed all the little idols?
That was Abraham's father.
Yeah, Abraham's
That was Abraham's father.
And what was his name?
Terach.
What was his name? Abraham's father?
Terach. Terach.
I forgot.
They called him Terry for short.
I didn't. Yeah, you don't. Not something I remember.
No.
No. Just call him Abraham's father.
He called him Dad. That's what we did. So okay.
And what's Gehinnom?
Oh, good question. What is Gehinnom? That is a word that we use basically to describe hell. It's always difficult to use words like hell because the Jewish version of hell is not the same as the version of hell that we tend to picture in more Christian imageries.
So what is the Jewish version?
What is the Jewish version of Gehinnom, of hell?
Yeah.
Hope you never find out.
One of the ways that I've heard it described is the pain, embarrassment, shame, and torture that we feel when we see what we could have achieved if we'd have just tried that a little bit harder.
I've heard that it's God's light's denied them. They can't, They don't see the light. That God is hidden from them. That's hell.
I don't know.
Fortunately, none of us know.
Unfortunately, none of us know.
What I find difficult with many of these situations where it seems to categorically say that if you're wicked, you won't have any peace in the world. Forget about, but the world to come, none of us know what and how and when.
1 second. Paul, can you hear? Can everyone hear okay on Zoom? What Martin's saying?
We know now what is going on. We know what went on for the last few thousand years. And we know that people who are wicked and awful sometimes, and in many cases, don't have a bad life in this world.
No.
And yet we're constantly told that if you behave like this, you will receive the benefit not only in the world to come, but in this world. And if you behave like that, that's what will happen to you. And it doesn't.
What doesn't?
It isn't true. Because I've seen wonderful people suffer and horrible people achieve great happiness. Let's put it, I don't care about their money, but who don't care a damn and who live perfectly happy lives. So, it's very difficult to understand the constant proposition that if you're good, you will be rewarded, and if you're bad, you will be punished in this life.
In this life, but in the world to come.
Yeah, that I don't know. Yeah, the evidence is without a doubt.
That's true.
And, it's a very difficult.
It's one of the biggest problems we face, understanding that. It's almost the biggest sometimes to faith.
Yeah, some people have, I mean, there is a book, Why Do Bad
Things happen to good people?
And there's another one, Why Do Good Things Happen to Bad People?
Where was God during the Second World War?
It's not a question one can answer, but it's difficult when the Mishnah particularly emphasize
it. Yeah.
And I'm not asking for an answer, but
no, there's that.
I've asked it of myself many times, and I don't get.
To quote our dear friend Paul Fabian, who quotes this source often, "My ways are not your ways."
Yeah, my ways are not your ways. I go to a shiur each morning with Ben Steele and with other people as well, and it's one of the questions that we ask: why? With the story of Joseph, with the story of many things, the outcome is often wonderful. But why did they have to suffer for the good result?
So that they overcome.
Yeah, but you can talk very generally about these things, but never actually help someone that's going through a hard time.
No.
And that's really the difficulty of this, is that you could say, when you get to the end of it and you look back on all of it and it will all make sense. That's great, but it's incredibly painful now. And it used to be when we had prophets that if a person was being faced with a challenge, you could go to the prophet and they would say, well, what do you expect? You didn't tip your waiter last week when you went to the restaurant, and that's why you're being given that now. But we don't have that anymore.
But those things are trivial. I mean, last week in Israel, a young man from Hamas in Jerusalem, who was in fact originally a lone soldier. He was from northwest London. He actually lived in Modi'in. And he was about 22 years old.
His grandfather is Shlomo Levine from Hampstead.
Yeah. And, how can you put that into any context of good and evil? It's impossible. No. It really is impossible.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
There's no answer.
And not by way of answering at all, but clearly this is a very generalized conceptual Mishnah. When we have in this Mishnah, what is the difference between the disciples of Avraham and the disciples of Bilam? So it says the disciples of Avraham enjoy this world and inherit the world to come. So I don't think that it's trying to tell us, and clearly, anecdotally, it doesn't play out this way. It's not that we have a blissful life in this world and we have a blissful life in the world to come. The capacity for enjoying this world is available to us. But crucially and critically, because of the goodness that we do in our physical finite life on earth, so we inherit the world to come and we enjoy that as well. Conversely, the disciples of Bilam, they might enjoy this world, but they're not going to enjoy the next one. And I think that's more the point, that's more the focus, is that people will suffer in this world. The capacity for enjoying life is available to them, even if they're faced with challenges and obstacles. But the point is that at the end of it, there's going to be a reward. But for someone who is a disciple of Bilam and commits themselves to destroying Olam Hazeh, destroying this world for themselves or for other people, when they get to the next world, boy oh boy, and that's where it really hurts, and that's where it really hits. This imagery that we have of what hell looks like. We experience a sense of shame and a sense of embarrassment at different times throughout our lives for different things. But the the feeling will be so much more heightened, we're told, when it comes to this next phase. The feeling of missing your mark, missing your potential, missing something that was easily within your grasp. There's famous Gemaras that talk about how when good people die, they are going to look back and see their Yetzer Hara as this enormous mountain. Right? And they're going to say, goodness me, how was I able to get over that mountain and fight all of my urges and resist all of my temptations and make the right decisions on all of these occasions? What an amazing accomplishment. And meanwhile, for someone who was wicked, they're going to look over their shoulder, they're going to see this little hair on the floor. And they're going to be like, how could I not even get over that tiny little hair? And yet now I'm being faced with all this punishment. It was so easy for me to just make those decisions, and I chose not to. I chose to follow the wrong path.
Now, going back to the Mashiach, the world has to be perfect before the Mashiach comes?
I don't know, Rita.
No, but is that what they
Just
say?
do you, Rita. All right, you do.
No.
Do what you need to do. She'll do what you. Yeah.
Yeah, but is
I
that
don't
what
know.
they say, isn't it?
We talk about how we're either going to reach a point with Mashiach coming because we've deserved it, or because time's run out and we don't deserve it. What that means,
We haven't got a lot of time.
do I know? We just need to work harder. We just need to work harder. We need to make sure that we're not being rude to people. Make sure that we're doing as many mitzvot as we can. Make sure that we're bringing as much goodness and as much light as we possibly can into the world, and hope that we're doing our part. You know, the examples that I've heard, you know, as this generation being described as, you know, if you imagine we have to fill the barrel with water, and when the barrel's full, the Mashiach will come. You know, so the imagery is that, you know, there's it's like 99% full. It's just like the last few drops that we need to squeeze out of us in this generation. So like all of the stuff that we're doing, like we just need to tip it over the edge and then we'll actually get there. But we've all got to try. The barrel's basically full. This period of time, as we've talked about in the bigger picture as well, it's known as the heel of Mashiach. You know, the very last part of the journey before we are able to embrace Mashiach. They call it the birth pains of Mashiach. So in the same way that when a woman is giving birth, her contractions start off far apart, and then they get closer and closer, and they get more and more intense. But at the end of all of that intensity comes that birth. So that's the imagery that's talked about with relation to the generation leading up to Mashiach, is that we're going to have this intense experience of bad things happening, because those are the birth pains, and they become more and more frequent and more intense, and we go from a pandemic to an incident in Meron, and straight after an incident in Meron, we're on to a fuel shortage, and then we're on to a guy being murdered in the Alta. It becomes more and more frequent, it becomes more and more intense. Right, but it will eventually lead into that birth and that moment of Mashiach. I'm so scared of David today. He's on fire! Go on.
You would be forced to think, with that analogy you just given, that story you just given, you would be forced to think that the Holocaust, it couldn't get any worse than that. And so that's the final birth pangs.
It's all part of it.
That's the conclusion you would come to with that whole thing.
It's all part of it. The scary.
We could have been completely wiped out.
Oh,
We nearly were.
Well, yeah, but we weren't. Were we?
I think it's bad
We're
enough.
still here.
Of course, it's bad enough. But
Do you want to know one of the scariest things about all of this? One of the scariest things about all of this is we may come to a point where actually we'll look back at all of this and realize just how it was within our grasp to just do that little bit more, and we could have ended it. That's part of the faith of being a Jew, is that Mashiach will come and all of this will disappear. All of these difficult times, all of this pain and all of this suffering will go away.
So we're all
And we
good.
just need to
Nice.
collaborate and work harder on achieving it. There's a Hasidic Rebbe called the Slonimer Rebbe. I'm not trying for us to get all intense over here, but there's a Hasidic Rebbe called the Slonimer Rebbe who says the Mashiach is here. He's just on the other side of the door. We just have to open the door. We have to want it as well, and as a society, we don't have the foundations to even appreciate what it all means. We talk about, I believe in the coming of Mashiach. We have no idea what it all means. We have no idea what it's all going to look like, but it's part of our bread and butter, of our faith as a Jew, to believe that it's in our best interests. And if it's in our best interests, we just need to do something. We just need to work that bit harder to try and make it happen. It's a bit like climate change, Everyone knows that it's an eventuality, but no one wants to make that small change to make it, to keep it at bay. So if I turn off my lights at night, then all of a sudden we're going to save the environment. No, but if we take those little steps, and everyone takes those little steps, then we'll actually save. So it's a bit similar. If I start giving a bit more charity, or if I start, turning my phone off on Shabbos, whatever it means, then all of a sudden, no. But if we start to have a paradigm shift of our Jewish experience, then eventually it will happen. But we talk about if all of the Jewish people were to keep Shabbat, Mashiach would come. Right, which is why Rabbi Goldstein tried to launch the Shabbos project, try and get everyone in the world to keep one Shabbat. Right? And let's see what happens. What we've got to lose already, But and that's the thing, because once it happens, all these prophecies of beating our swords into plowshares, the ending of disease, the ending of illness, the ending of war, the ending of all of these stuff that we complain about and that drag us down and that ruin our lives, it could all go away. What's entailed? I don't know, but let's get there already. Let's want it. The trouble is that we talk in such kind of vague concepts, but we don't necessarily live our lives that we actually want it to happen. And this Rebbe, the Slonim Rebbe, says he's right here. We just need to open the door. It's not like we have to hope that the Mashiach gets born and then he's here. He's right here. He's waiting. And we have to do.
The love of Israel Rebbe of Shalom
Yeah.
said exactly the same thing.
Yeah. Sure he did.
It didn't happen.
But how would, if that Mashiach were to come, how would that be in terms of what's going on with other denominations, other religions? Because it can't just apply to...
At the end of Aleinu, what do we say?
The whole world.
One second.
Fine.
What's the word that I'm trying to think of?
199.
No, I know where's the phrase in Aleinu that talks about how it's going to be worldwide. Everyone's going to come to know. That's ultimately what we say.
Oh yeah,
Every yeah.
And it said that
Then the Lord shall be king over all the earth. On that day the Lord shall be one, his name one.
Yeah, that's it. Right? That's it. The end. Yeah.
That's it.
That's it. Right, thank you. My mind is just going blank.
Cordovero says that he didn't believe in the Lurianic with the vessels. He says that when all the Jewish souls are pure as Adam before he sinned, then we will all, Mashiach will come because we'll all reflect God's goodness back to him. That's an esoteric. So we have to be pure. So we can only look after ourselves. We can't worry about. We have to.
Well, we can only control ourselves in all these things. Wow, today's got intense, hasn't it? Really
it's
intense.
A big subject.
It is a big subject.
We'll never know, will we?
Okay, let's try and see what we can talk about over here. So we've got these traits. Let's see if we can understand a little bit about these traits. So we said ayin tova, a good eye. which I think previously when we've talked about a good eye, we talked about the ability to be optimistic and to be tolerant and to be generous, and to be happy with others' success and to be able to have an outlook that is positive. Ruach nemucha, a humble spirit, finding the balance between generosity and stinginess, showing mercy and harshness, finding these balances, the humble spirit that, whereas most of the time that's what I was trying to say. Okay, so whereas most of the time we have to live a life of balance, now I understand my notes. Whereas normally we have to live a life of balance between generosity and stinginess, between mercy and harshness, whatever it might be. So ruach nemucha, when it comes to being humble, we are told to go to the extreme, and to really steer clear of arrogance. And so humility there, the ruach nemucha, is something that we should really be aspiring to. And nefesh shfela, which we translate as a meek soul, or on the screen it was translated as a moderate appetite. In my book it's described as a meek soul. So what's that talking about? So I've written my notes over here. Meekness and unpretentiousness of spirit and behavior, the ability to exercise restraint and self-control. So with all of these three traits, that's what we should be aiming for, and then we will be a disciple of Avraham Avinu.
Shouldn't they said there, and I've forgotten the three, where was it? It's the world's built on Hesed, Torah, learning. What's the other one?
Torah, Chesed, and Gemilut Chesed, acts of kindness. Yeah.
Shouldn't that have been used?
Well, that was right at the beginning. This is just when it comes to describing Avraham with these three traits. We're supposed to aim for all of that, But when it comes to aiming to be a disciple of Avraham, that's what we're trying to say. That's this week's focus. Try and have a good eye, meekness of spirit, and Rita.
Can you explain in plain English what it means? I mean, this inherit Gehinnom, which means hell, whatever it is, and go down to the pit of destruction. That means the world. It means it's not.
It means it's not going to end well for those who are. Maybe we can say it in plain English when we just have a little look at some of the.
In plain English, I understand what it means, but.
So give me one extra minute, okay? So we talk about Bilam's three traits.
Yeah.
It says that he had an ayin ra'ah. So what's the ayin ra'ah? So we've talked about this in the past as well, that it's being a negative person, it's being a jealous person, it's having an insatiable appetite for all the wrong things. The ruach gevoha is being pompous and boastful. And the nefesh rechava is being resentful of others, being unwilling to help the less fortunate, being greedy, having insatiable desires, and leaning into those desires and trying to satisfy those desires. So what we're saying is, someone that leads their life like that, it's not going to end well.
Yeah, I know, but pit of destruction means it's got to be destroyed. This one means destruction, destroyed.
Well, they're going to end up in
What was the Hebrew word?
Va'ata Elohim toridem liv'er shachas, which it translates as the pit of destruction.
Bloodthirsty and deceitful men shall not live out half their days.
Yeah, it's. I don't know how else would we describe it other than it's not going to end well.
I thought it was a bit funny.
Do you know what, Rita? Please God, you should never have to see it and never have to deal with it. But it's. I mean that there are pieces of Gemara, there are pieces of Talmud that do describe some of the punishments that await some of our most evil people in history. You don't want to be faced with that, Rita. You just don't want that. You just don't want that on your shoulders as well.
One of the nicest descriptions of a good eye is someone who sees the consequences of their actions.
Yeah, probably that means, isn't it? It's probably
which
true,
I think
isn't it?
is one of them.
I think we had Ezahu Chacham, who is wise,
Yeah.
someone who sees the outcome of their actions. Anyway, I'm going to switch off the recording, guys, just because I do have to go in a minute. But I'll take comments and questions on Zoom. So for everyone watching, all 0 people of you watching on YouTube and Facebook, I will wish you all a wonderful, meaningful day, and we'll see you again next week.